My watch collecting journey has had a lot of ups and downs. In fact, it felt like for a very long time there was a bit of like a fuse going along. It was sort of burning slowly. During this time I was making mistakes. I was buying watches which I shouldn't have bought. And then around about 7 years ago there was this explosion. This fuse hit that dynamite and it went bang. And I went from somebody who really liked watches to somebody who really liked watches, and then I started making more mistakes. Then I started learning lessons, and today I want to share 10 mistakes that hopefully will make you a better watch collector. Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I am talking about watches, and I'm talking about 10 mistakes that I have made throughout my watch collecting journey. Or at least some of them are mistakes, and some of them are also near misses. A near miss for me is a mistake that I've almost made, chose not to make at the last minute, and realized later that it would have been a mistake. And that is the first thing that I want to talk about today. That is learning from your mistakes. Making mistakes is actually a good thing. Well, sometimes it's a good thing. When we make mistakes, we learn from those experiences, we learn from those decisions, we learn why that was a mistake, and we take that knowledge and we take it into our next sort of section of our lives or our next watch purchase. And that is the number one thing that I want to get across here is mistakes can be made, mistakes are sometimes okay, but we need to learn from those mistakes. And that's what I have tried to do because I'm trying to make better watch buying decisions for myself. And one of the ways I can do that, and one of the best ways I can do that, is from learning from my watch mistakes. Number two, buying for the wrong reason. And this can be many reasons, but buying a watch for the wrong reason. Buying it because you're trying to buy a specific brand versus a watch you like. Buying because it's being hyped up on the internet versus it's a watch that you like. Buying it because it's on special and it feels like a bargain versus buying it because you like. I think you get the idea. I think sometimes we do make these mistakes. I think sometimes certain things sort of push us to buy a watch and they're the wrong things. They are the wrong things to make us choose a certain watch over another watch. I think it's always important to buy the right watch. Don't let other factors make that decision for you. And I've done this myself, and I've almost done this myself on many occasions. And the best example of this that I have in my experience from near misses that I've made is when it's come to purchasing watches from Omega. I'm a big fan of the brand Omega, but I've realized that there's only a few watches in their collection that I really like, and those few watches I can't afford. But there are other Omegas I can afford. There are other Omegas that are sort of vintage or near new or secondhand or even occasional new Omega, but they're not the right watch for me. They're not a watch that I really want to own, but the idea of owning an Omega has sometimes pushed me to the point of almost purchasing one of these more affordable Omegas. And that would have been a bad decision because I would have ended up buying a watch that wasn't right for me. Number three is buying a watch too quickly, having that impulse purchase decision. And I'm going to say, however, though, I've done this a few times and sometimes it's ended up being a great decision, but then sometimes it's ended up being a bad decision. So it's more about awareness of impulse buying. It's not to say that you should never impulse buy a watch, but you need to have the awareness that that's what you're doing. You need to be able to step back, even if it's only for a moment, and say, is this actually a good watch buying decision for me? Am I buying myself the right watch, or am I just too excited in that moment? Am I going to regret this purchase? Occasionally, you may regret that purchase, but other times it may be the right purchase. But at least if you have a bit of an understanding and a bit of awareness of it, I think you'll end up making that better buying decision. Number four is buying too many watches within a short period of time. Now, I think there's one way of doing this that might be a good sort of reason. And perhaps it's not the good financial reason, but it's sort of when people get involved in this hobby to begin with, they get all excited and they end up going from 1 or 2 watches to 12 watches all very quickly. And then they end up selling all those watches. They then learn from those mistakes or those purchasing mistakes and end up starting to buy some better watches for themselves. But financially, it's not a great thing to do. And for me, financially, the few times I've done this, it has not worked out the right way. It has not ended up being money saved. It's actually being sort of money lost, because every time I do this, it's because a group of watches that I was sort of planning to buy anyway all come up on sale at the same time. And I think, well, I might as well buy these watches that I was going to buy anyway, but buy them on sale whilst they are on sale so I can save some money. Occasionally, I've also bought some second-hand watches that are watches that I've been chasing, but they all seem to come up at once at great prices, so I end up buying them all at the same time. And again, feels like I'm saving money. The problem that has occurred every time I do this is that there's one watch generally out of that group that grabs my attention more than the others, and that's the one I end up wearing, and that's the one I end up having like a bit of a honeymoon phase with. And as I do that, I try to give the other watches some attention, but I keep getting drawn back to that sort of primary watch. And by the time I've got through that sort of honeymoon phase with that primary watch, I seem to have already gone through that honeymoon phase with the other watches, even though I haven't really given much attention to them or even worn them enough. So I've ended up selling those watches, and I've ended up missing out on those honeymoon phases with those watches. So although I may have saved some money initially, it's ended up being a bit of a waste. Number 5 is being caught up in watch specifications. And I'm definitely been caught up in watch specifications before, because sometimes buying watches at a budget that have great specifications can be great buying decisions. You can end up with a really good quality watch, well finished, lots of features, sapphire crystals, good movements, and that are on a budget. But sometimes that idea of getting a watch that has great specifications can overshadow the idea of, is it the right watch for you? Sometimes you are concentrating too much on the specifications versus buying the right watch. And I would rather buy the right watch that possibly doesn't have those specifications than buy the watch with all the specifications that's not the right watch for me. Obviously, it's great when you can align both of these things, buy the right watch with all the right specifications, but just be mindful that you're not buying it because it has a sapphire crystal. You're not buying it because it has a certain movement. You're not buying it for any of these other reasons beyond the fact that you're buying it because it's the right watch for you. Number 6 is not to be too narrow-minded. I think it is very easy for us as watch collectors to be very focused on a particular style of watch or a particular brand of watch, and then you sort of end up missing out on opportunities. You end up missing out on growth. You end up missing out on seeing what you actually like because you're being too narrow-minded. I understand why this happens sometimes, because I was definitely this kind of person before I sort of fell down this rabbit hole of collecting, because I was buying dive watches. I was buying mostly dive watches with black dials because they were the watches that I liked the most. And it's because I only had a certain amount of money that I was actually going to spend, a very small amount. I was too sort of scared to try something different. I would rather stick to something that's safe and buy what I know that I like. But when I then actually started to allow myself to branch out a little bit and try some watches, yes, I ended up buying some that might not have been right for me, but I've ended up finding some other watches, other styles of watches that I like even more than black dialed dive watches. So I think it has turned out a really good thing for me to allow myself to break away from this narrow view. And if you're able to do that, obviously still within a budget that it works for you, then I think it's a really good idea. Number 7 is don't always buy the popular watch. Don't always buy the obvious choice. There are some watches within brands that are incredible that I think are personally better than the obvious choices that are worth your attention. This is why I like to look in the back catalogue of certain watch brands. This is why I like to look at the range of a brand versus just the obvious one. I always use Hamilton as an example for this one, because when I think about Hamilton, I think about their field watches, and they do great field watches. You know, I do like them, but they ended up not being the right watches for me. But I ended up finding my favourite watch of all time within the back catalogue of Hamilton, a watch that I would not have come across if I hadn't been looking, hadn't been searching. I ended up buying this Jazzmaster GMT, and it is by far my favourite watch of all time, and it is not a watch that would be the obvious choice. So I think doing that digging, doing that searching, looking beyond the obvious watches, looking beyond the popular watches is definitely worth doing. Number 8, not all watches are the same. Now, not the obvious meaning of this. Of course, not all watches are the same, but what I mean is that not all watches within a certain brand are the same. Not all watches within a certain brand are as good as each other or are right for you. If you find a watch within a brand that you absolutely love, that doesn't mean that every other watch in their collection is going to be right for you or you think is as good as the one that you've found. Not all watches within a price category are the same. Sometimes I sort of find a watch within a price category and I think, oh, watches in this price category are fantastic. And that's not exactly true. What is true is that there are great watches within each price category. There are watches that are cheaper, that are better than more expensive watches. It's about finding the right watches for you and not being caught up too much in thinking that all things are the same, or that you are safe to buy a watch from a certain brand because you've liked a couple from them already. Don't feel that it's safe to buy a watch at a certain price range because you have a couple that have worked for you, because they may not be right. Those watches from that brand, other watches from that brand may be wrong for you. Other watches in that price category may be wrong for you as well. So thinking outside of that and being aware that not all watches are the same. Number 9 is not to discount things. I've certainly found over this watch collecting journey that I've sort of crossed things off my list saying, okay, no, I don't like that. I'm not going to buy that again. I've sort of said, okay, I don't like that brand. I'm not going to buy from them again. And that has been the wrong thing to do. It's good to learn from your decisions that you've made, or mistakes that you've made, or things that you've learnt, but it is also worth revisiting certain things. And the best example I can give you for this is, for me, was leather straps. I'd owned quite a few watches on leather straps and I didn't enjoy the experience. I didn't enjoy that watch on a leather strap. Every single time I wore one of those watches, I thought, this would be great if it was on a bracelet. But it wasn't until I found the right watch on the right leather strap that I realized, actually, I do like leather straps. I just like particular leather straps. And I learned that about myself and what I like about leather straps. And I've taken that experience into buying other watches with leather straps. Now I actually have a few in my collection that I absolutely adore. So discounting things that perhaps you thought you learned earlier on in your watch journey may be worth revisiting. And number 10, maybe the most important thing of all, and that is understanding why certain watches are in your collection and why other watches that have entered your collection have left. Sit there and look at your collection and go, why do I love that watch so much? Why do I like the watches that I have in my collection? And how do I find other watches that I like as much as the ones that have remained? Understanding why you're collecting, understanding what collection you're building, understanding the individual watches in that collection and why they stay in that collection. Recently, I've actually just finally learned this. I've been trying to understand why I've bought certain watches. I've been trying to understand why some have stayed and some have left. And now that I think I have a fairly good grasp on that, I'm going to end up making better buying decisions in the future and end up buying better watches for me and end up utilizing the money that I put into those watches better. And I think this whole list revolves around making better buying decisions, because if you can make a better buying decision, you're going to end up with better watches. And whilst you think about that, and whilst you think about these 10 things, maybe watch this video next.